October 29th, 1929. Wall Street, New York City. A well-dressed banker walks into his office on the 45th floor, opens the window, and jumps. He's not the first that day. He won't be the last. The stock market didn't just fall, it shattered. Billions of dollars evaporated in hours. But here's what nobody tells you. The crash wasn't the depression. The crash was just the spark. What followed was a decade-long fire that burned through every American family. 1 in 4 workers couldn't find a job. Children went hungry. Families lost everything for 10 years straight. And it all started because Americans thought they'd figured out how to get rich without working. Sound familiar?
And yeah, this is gonna hurt to hear.
Let's rewind to 1920. World War I just ended. America is booming, factories are humming, people have jobs, they have money. And for the first time, regular Americans discover something magical. The stock market. Here's how stocks work, explained like you're 5. Let's say you and your friend want to open a lemonade stand. You need $50 for supplies, you've got 25. Your friend has 25. You're each putting in half the money, so you each own half the business. That's a stock, a tiny piece of ownership. Now let's say your lemonade stand becomes super popular. People line up around the block. You're making serious money. Now your friend decides to sell their half of the lemonade stand. How much is it worth? More than $25, right? Because the stand is worth more now. That's how stock prices go up. As companies make more money, their stock becomes more valuable. But in the 1920s, Americans discovered a cheat code. Or so they thought. You could buy stocks without actually having the money. It was called buying on margin. Here's how it worked. A stock costs $100, but you only put down $10 of your own money. The broker lends you the other $90. You now own the stock. If the stock goes up to $150, you sell it, pay back the $90 you borrowed, and keep the profit. You just made $40 profit on a $10 investment. Jackpot, right? This is where things get crazy. First, the wealthy started doing it. Then the upper middle class. Then doctors, lawyers, business owners. People who'd never invested before suddenly became stock market experts. It was only about 3% of Americans. But that 3%? They were gambling with borrowed money. The stock market became America's casino. And they thought they couldn't lose. Between 1920 and 1929, the stock market went up 500%. 500%. If you'd invested $1,000, you'd have $6,000. And people thought it would never stop. People quit their jobs to trade stocks full-time. They bought cars, houses, fancy clothes, all with money they hadn't earned yet, betting the market would keep going up. Newspapers ran stories about ordinary people becoming millionaires overnight. Everyone wanted in. But remember that margin thing, that borrowed money? There was a catch. If the stock price went down, the broker could demand you pay back the loan immediately. It's called a margin call. And if you couldn't pay, they'd sell your stocks to get their money back. No problem, people said. Stocks only go up, except they don't.
Spoiler alert, it gets way worse.
September 1929. Some investors start getting nervous. The market's been climbing for 9 years straight. That's not normal. They start selling. When people sell, prices drop. When prices drop, more people panic and sell. It's a feedback loop. September becomes October. The selling accelerates, small drops become bigger drops. Thursday, October 24th, 1929, Black Thursday. The market drops 11% in one day. Panic sets in. Investors rush to sell before it gets worse. The weekend passes, everyone's terrified. Monday, October 28th, the market drops another 13%. Then comes Tuesday, October 29th, Black Tuesday. 16 million shares traded. That's triple a normal day. Everyone was trying to sell at once. But the real disaster was just beginning. Nobody was buying. When everyone wants to sell and nobody wants to buy, prices collapse. Stocks that were worth $100 yesterday are worth $50, then $20, then $5. But remember all those people who bought on margin, who borrowed $90 to buy a $100 stock. When their stocks drop from $100 to $50, the broker calls, "Pay back the $90 right now." They can't, so the broker sells their stock for $50, the investor loses everything, and that forced selling drives prices even lower. More selling means lower prices. Lower prices trigger more margin calls. More margin calls mean more selling. It's a death spiral. And it's accelerating. In 2 days, the stock market lost $30 billion in value. That's $400 billion in today's money. Just gone. But most people weren't in the stock market. Only about 3% of Americans owned stocks. So why did everyone suffer? Because the crash was just the first domino.
And when that domino fell, it took everything else with it.
Think of it like dominoes lined up across the entire country. Each one represents part of the economy. The stock market crash knocks over the first domino. Watch what happens. Domino 1. Rich investors lose everything. They stop spending money on cars, clothes, fancy dinners, everything. Domino 2. Car companies, clothing stores, restaurants, they all lose customers. They have to fire workers. Domino 3. Those fired workers can't pay their rent or buy groceries. More businesses lose customers, more firings. Domino 4. Remember all those people who bought stocks on margin? They used their houses as collateral. Now they can't pay. Banks seize their homes. Domino 5. Banks suddenly own thousands of houses they can't sell. They're losing money. Domino 6. People panic. They rush to banks to withdraw their savings before the bank fails. This is the moment everything breaks. Banks don't actually keep your money in a vault. They lend it out to other people. That's how banks make money. They pay you 3% interest on your savings, then lend it to someone else at 6%. It works fine as long as everyone doesn't want their money at the same time. But in 1929, everyone wanted their money at the same time. Say a bank has $1 million in deposits from 100 people. Each person deposited $10,000, but the bank loaned out $900,000. They only keep $100,000 in cash. If 10 people withdraw their full $10,000, the vault empties. The other 90 people get nothing. When people see a line forming at a bank, they panic. They run to get in line. More people see the growing line and panic harder. It's called a bank run. And in the 1930s, it happened everywhere. Over 9,000 banks failed. 9,000. Your life savings? Gone. Not protected, not insured, just gone. This wasn't poor people getting hurt. This was everyone, doctors, lawyers, shop owners, people who'd worked their whole lives, saved responsibly, never touched the stock market, wiped out because their bank failed. By 1933, the unemployment rate hit 25%. 1 in 4 workers had no job. But that number doesn't capture the reality, because it wasn't evenly distributed. In some towns, half the people were unemployed. In some industries, almost everyone lost their jobs. And there was no safety net, no unemployment insurance, no food stamps, no welfare, nothing. If you lost your job, you were on your own.
You think that's bad? We haven't even gotten to the dust storms yet.
People lost their homes. Entire families, parents, children, grandparents, living in shacks made of cardboard and scrap metal. They called these settlements Hoovervilles, named mockingly after President Herbert Hoover. Thousands of Hoovervilles appeared across America, in Central Park, along rivers, under bridges. Families huddled around fires trying to stay warm through winter. Children stopped going to school because they didn't have shoes, didn't have clothes, didn't have food for lunch. People stood in bread lines for hours waiting for free food. Lines wrapped around city blocks, men who once ran businesses standing in line for soup. The shame was overwhelming. In America, you're supposed to work hard and succeed. That's the dream. But now, hardworking people couldn't feed their families. They felt like failures. Some men left their families, just walked away. They couldn't bear watching their children go hungry, couldn't handle the shame of unemployment. They became wanderers, riding freight trains across the country looking for any work, anywhere. The suicide rate soared. The birth rate plummeted. People couldn't afford children. And the government? They made it worse. President Herbert Hoover believed the economy would fix itself. He thought government intervention would make things worse. So he did very little. He told Americans to be patient, to have faith. That prosperity was just around the corner. But prosperity wasn't around the corner. It was getting worse. By 1932, industrial production had fallen 50%. 50%. Half the economy just stopped. Farmers were hit especially hard. Food prices collapsed. A bushel of wheat that sold for $1 in 1929 sold for 30 cents in 1932. Farmers couldn't pay their mortgages. Banks seized their land. Generations of family farms gone. This was America in the 1930s. The richest country in the world, and people were starving. Something had to change.
And in 1932, something did.
November 1932, presidential election. Herbert Hoover versus Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR. Hoover promised to stay the course. Roosevelt promised a new deal for America. It wasn't even close. Roosevelt won 42 of 48 states. America was desperate for change. March 4th, 1933, Roosevelt's inauguration. His first words became legendary. "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Then he got to work. His first move? Fix the banks. Because if people don't trust banks, the economy can't function. March 6th, 1933. Roosevelt declared a bank holiday. He closed every bank in America, all of them, for 4 days. During those 4 days, government inspectors examined every bank's books. Solid banks could reopen. Failed banks stayed closed. When banks reopened on March 13th, something amazing happened. People deposited money. They started trusting the system again. Then Roosevelt went on the radio. These were called fireside chats. He explained what was happening in simple terms. He spoke directly to people's fears. "My friends," he'd say, and people believed him. They felt heard. Roosevelt's New Deal launched dozens of programs. Some worked, some failed. But the message was clear. The government wasn't going to sit back and watch people suffer. The Civilian Conservation Corps put 3 million young men to work planting trees, building parks, fighting fires. They earned $30 a month and sent most of it home to their families. The Works Progress Administration built schools, hospitals, bridges, roads. It employed 8 million people. If you've driven on an old bridge or walked through a public park, there's a good chance the WPA built it. The Social Security Act created retirement benefits. For the first time, elderly Americans wouldn't have to rely entirely on their children. Still here today, the Tennessee Valley Authority brought electricity to rural America, built dams, created jobs, transformed entire regions. Critics called it socialism. They said government was getting too big. They said it would ruin America. Roosevelt didn't care. People were suffering. He was going to help. But even as FDR tried to rebuild the economy, nature struck back. In 1934, drought hit the Great Plains. Years of over-farming had stripped the soil of nutrients. When the drought came, there was nothing holding the soil down. The wind came, and it took everything. Massive dust storms, called black blizzards, turned day into night. Dust clouds 10,000 feet high. You couldn't see 5 feet in front of you. The dust buried farms, killed livestock, gave people a disease called dust pneumonia. Children died. Hundreds of thousands of farmers fled Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas. They piled everything into old trucks and drove west to California hoping for work. They called them Okies, and California didn't want them. Signs went up, "No Okies." They were treated like criminals for being poor. Even with FDR's programs, even with government trying to help, the Depression dragged on. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The New Deal didn't end the Great Depression. Throughout the late 1930s, unemployment dropped from 25% to around 15% by 1937. Better, but still terrible. The economy improved, but it didn't boom. Recovery was slow, painful, incomplete. Then everything changed. December 7th, 1941. Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. America enters the war. Suddenly, factories need to produce planes, tanks, ships, ammunition. Millions of men join the military. Women take factory jobs. Everyone has work. By 1943, unemployment is under 2%. The economy is roaring. It's a dark irony. The worst war in human history ended the worst economic crisis in American history. But the Depression left permanent scars and permanent changes.
Changes we still live with today.
The generation that lived through the Depression never forgot. They became savers, not spenders. They never threw anything away. They never trusted banks completely. They taught their children to be careful, to save for rainy days. Because they'd seen what happens when everything falls apart. The Depression proved that markets don't always fix themselves, that sometimes government needs to act, that sometimes you need a safety net. So America built one. Social Security, unemployment insurance, bank deposit insurance, labor protections, minimum wage. Some people love these programs, some people hate them, but they all exist because of the Great Depression. The Depression also led to massive financial regulation. The Glass-Steagall Act separated commercial banking from investment banking. The Securities and Exchange Commission was created to regulate the stock market. These rules stayed in place for 60 years. Then, in 1999, Glass-Steagall was repealed. And in 2008, well, you know what happened. The Great Depression taught us that speculation bubbles always pop. That when people buy things with borrowed money, betting prices will keep rising, disaster follows. We learned that lesson in 1929. We forgot it by 2008. We're probably forgetting it again right now.
So what does this mean for you?
First, understand that economies move in cycles, boom and bust, growth and recession. It's normal, but sometimes the bust is catastrophic. Second, never assume prices only go up. Not stocks, not houses, not crypto. Nothing only goes up forever. Third, borrowed money is dangerous. Margin in the 1920s. Subprime mortgages in 2008. Leverage always amplifies both gains and losses. Fourth, diversification matters. When people lost everything in the Depression, it was often because everything they owned was in one place. One bank, one company's stock, one piece of land. Fifth, having some cash savings can save your life. When banks failed, people with cash survived. People without cash starved. Sixth, be skeptical when everyone says the same thing. In the 1920s, everyone said stocks only go up. In 2006, everyone said housing prices never fall. When everyone agrees, someone's probably wrong. Seventh, pay attention to inequality. In 1929, the top 1% owned 40% of the nation's wealth. Sound familiar? Extreme inequality makes economies fragile. And finally, remember that behind every economic statistic are real people. The Great Depression wasn't just numbers. It was your great-grandparents. It was children going hungry. It was families torn apart. Economic policy isn't just math, it's about human lives.
The Great Depression was the worst economic disaster in American history, but America survived it, came back stronger, built protections so it would never happen again.
Then we slowly dismantled those protections and paid the price in 2008. Will we learn the lesson this time, or will we repeat it again? That depends on people like you, people who understand history, who ask questions, who don't blindly trust that everything will be fine. The next bubble is forming somewhere right now. Maybe you'll see it coming.
Thanks for sticking with me through this. Now you know why the Great Depression matters, and why we can't afford to forget it.
Stay curious, ask questions, and remember, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Please hit the like and subscribe buttons for more great content.